So the first thing that we're going to do, David, is a while back I had the opportunity to interview you a little bit, and I just want to spend probably 10 or 15 minutes letting people know a little bit about your story, because you're, I think one of your characteristics is this combination of confidence and humility. So David never likes to make the story about himself, but David actually has an amazing story. And, and so here's where I'm going to start. So this is a photo of Sterling Heights, Michigan, outside Detroit, sometime in the mid-50s. I think that's about when you were born. When you were born?
Late 50s. Yeah, it's right down the street from where I was born.
Okay. Represents kind of the culture that you come from, would you say? Can you speak to that at all?
Sure. So I grew up in the Detroit area. I was actually born in Enid Hospital in Detroit. My mom and dad were living in Detroit at the time. Eventually moved to a nearby suburb, really more of a bedroom community for Detroit than anything else. Spent most of my growing up days pretty much seen the movie Sandlot. It was kind of my growing up time. I mean, we played baseball dawn till dusk during the summertime. We had neighborhood kids that we all hung out with. It was primarily a blue-collar neighborhood that was sort of cookie-cutter for blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks. All of our parents, for the most part, worked in some way in the automotive industry, although my dad was the odd man out where he was in the restaurant industry. So we grew up relatively idyllic, middle-class kind of neighborhood. And didn't really start realizing the whole Detroit part of it, because when you're in a little suburb and you're living in this bubble, you live in your bubble and you don't experience much outside it. And then my dad started running restaurants in Detroit. He did to be a general manager of a hotel, food and beverage director, that kind of stuff. And so slave labor was really good because he had 6 kids. And so he'd pile us all in the car and we'd wait tables and bus tables. And I always got to clean the garbage cans and bang plates and all that kind of good stuff. And we always did that in Detroit proper. And so all of a sudden we were exposed to what the difference between our little blue collar spot where we lived and what Detroit was like. And at the time it was just a great experience. Okay, there's something different, no big deal. So I mean, I think I had a great childhood and had great parents, and all my siblings and I just sort of think back in those days. We all think pretty highly of the experience, and we've all been relatively successful.
So I have some childhood photos.
Really?
Yeah, so.
Wow, that's not you with the crossed eyes.
That is not you with the crossed eyes? I think it is you. Is it, or is it
Is that you buffing?
No, actually, I was thinking that with the guy with the face behind me, my cousin Jeff. That must be in the middle. That must be me. All those little girls there are my sisters.
Okay.
My mother in the background there passed away about 25 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, but she did know so.
And what's the trophy for? Or is it communion?
No, that was the Stan Sislitz Award for the first time it was ever offered for a scholar athlete. Unfortunately, I actually won it, and Stan Sislitz was a coach who had passed away, and his brother Fran Sislitz was the other guy competing for the trophy, and I won it. So I always felt bad about that, that my name got on the trophy before his did, but that was the first big kind of award that I ever won in high school.
So this is a picture of your family, yes? Are you the big guy in back?
Yes, that's me in back.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You describe it as a traditional middle-class Catholic family?
Yeah, my dad never had any fashion sense, and you can see that. But yeah, we had 6 kids. My mom and dad were great parents, but I can still remember those drapes in the living room. We lived in the same house until I went to college. So we moved out on the street when I was 6 months old, and then when I moved to college in probably mid-70s is when they finally moved just to another house. And so those drapes were up for about 20 years.
There are a whole lot of family pictures, right? So football played an important role in your life, and in high school in particular, there's some people associated with football also that played an important role.
Yeah, so I played 3 sports, baseball, football, and basketball, and I've always loved sports, and I was fortunate to have coaches that believed in me, and we could work through the process. And I was successful playing, but we won a lot of championships in high school, even though we weren't supposed to. But the big difference that I think Janyne was talking about here is that my high school football coach decided that I should be going to college to play football. And I wasn't big enough to play Division I. I was, in that picture, I was 6'2", 185, I think. And Division I football was looking for people, for tight ends or receivers of that size. So my coach, without me knowing about it, sent all my game films to all the Ivy League schools. Didn't tell me he was doing that. Now back then, that was something, because to send films, you actually had these tins with films in it that you had to pack up in a box and send to people. And so all of a sudden, I started getting these letters from football programs at Harvard and Yale and Dartmouth and Columbia. I'm like, I seriously had never contemplated going out of state to school, and had never even thought about ever going to a school that now I was learning about what's an Ivy League school. I had no idea. I mean, everyone had heard about Harvard and Yale, but there was always this thing. I never thought about going to college. And so then I started getting recruited. And before I know it, I'm applying to these colleges and was fortunate enough to get into 4, which is pretty remarkable, because today that wouldn't happen, but back in the day, I got into Harvard and Yale and Dartmouth and Penn, and waitlisted at Columbia, which I'm like, really? You don't want me, I don't want you either. And the good news is that in the Ivy League, they don't want you to not go there because you can't afford it. And so they don't give scholarships. They give financial aid based on what your income is. Well, my dad did not make much money at all. He had 6 kids in Catholic school. And so I was fortunate that virtually all of my education was paid for as a result of going to, I ended up going to Dartmouth, which was the least urban city of all of them, or at least urban campus of all of them. When I then went to visit Harvard, Yale, and Penn, those were pretty big cities. Felt like I was going to Detroit again, and I had plenty of opportunity to learn what the big city was like. So I chose Dartmouth, and it was a great, great choice. But I owe that all to Walton Emco, our head coach, when I was a kid, who kind of took it on himself to push me in a direction that, had we talked about it, I might have tried to dissuade him from, but it turned out.
So you went to Dartmouth, and football continued to play a role there for you. What position did you play?
I played any position they would be able to keep me on the field, but for the most part, defensive end or tackle, and then I was a long ball center, and on all the special teams. So anything that would keep me on the field. They wouldn't let me play offense, unfortunately.
So you think of defensive players as being nice guys, right? And so you won the 1978 Earl Hamilton Award, the senior football player who displays the friendliness, sense of humor, and appreciation of the outdoors as characterized by Earl Hamilton, freshman football coach from 55 to 65. And with that, you were given the award as a
bamboo Orbis fly fishing pole with double tip name engraved on it that I've never used, but it's sitting in my trophy room. And it's worth a bundle of money, which I had no idea. And I had people try and buy it from me. I would never give it up. But you know, it is interesting that there's something that I do in my career every day that I learned on this field. Sometimes you've got to kind of be able to turn a switch on and turn a switch off. So when I wasn't playing football, I turned off the football switch, and that was kind of neat. So I could be this friendly guy with a sense of humor and like to walk around and see the trees and the hills and stuff. But as soon as the football thing turned on the switch, and I had a reputation for being focused and aggressive and tireless and all those kind of things that good athletes have to be. So I learned a lot about that, because you really can't be that way all the time. And you don't realize it when you're going to high school that you're developing that skill set. But it's important even in our lives. I mean, think about if you're not a natural extrovert, and all of a sudden you got to go to a cocktail party, you might as well turn the switch on and become an extrovert for an hour, and then turn it back off, and the adrenaline drains, and you go home and do your thing. And I've done that my whole career, trying to figure out when to turn that switch on and when to turn that switch off.
So 2 things. Number one, we forget the power of choice that we have in our responses to things. We really forget that Covey has a model that basically says, I'm not sure these quotes, that if here's a stimulus and here's a response, and most of us think this happens, so this is how I respond. responded as a result, and I didn't have any choice. And Covey talks about creating this thing called a space between those two, where you actually put response and make choice about how you're going to respond. And that I have found is an absolutely significant development lesson for any leader. And you're talking about learning that, you're about intentionality in my choices.
I think that space in the middle actually enables you not to always be responding to stuff that happens to you, but if you're prepared to be aggressive about your response, it's almost like you are causing the change to happen in your way rather than receiving it yourself and having to sort of make up for something that's happened to you. So I think that space in the middle, it's really important to be prepared for just about anything that comes down the path. And even if you don't know explicitly what it's going to be, you already know how you're going to respond. How do I take this thing and move it in the direction that's going to be helpful to what I want to try to accomplish?
One of the metaphors is to have more than a black and a white crayon in there. Have a crayon box that's got a bunch of different crayons, so you can have a variety of responses that you choose. And that's a metaphor that I have used from the front line to the C-suite. And people realizing, oh, I have no choices. And I thought, something you've never mentioned before, and we've talked a lot,
Yeah, we have.
is
I did not pull this out of me before.
that you choose to do extroverted activities. Would you put yourself in a introverted?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My most favorite thing to do is to sit on the porch with my wife, both of us reading, or working in the garden. Maggie and I have been married now 37 years, and I mean, we've grown up in this career together. We've done all this work together as partners, and we are still best friends. I know that's kind of corny maybe, but and the thing we like to do is just sort of not be around people. I mean, if I can just be us. But then my job is to be around people. And so when I leave the house at dark 100, I flip the switch. And when I go around like this, I love this part of my job, being able to talk to you. To me, this feels like a one-on-one conversation with each of you, so it fits very, very well into my non-extrovert kind of persona. The dinner last night that Hannah and I shared, that was sort of the same thing. It's a group of people that's small enough that it doesn't feel like you gotta be out there, but when you go to some of the other chamber events that we do or anything else that I participate in, a lot of you just gotta kind of force yourself into the breach. There's a great line in the book I'm reading right now that calls for just 20 seconds of courage. And what that kind of difference can make in your life. And for most of the time, if you're flipping the switch, it doesn't happen automatically sometimes. I mean, you've got to get used to it. Prior to flipping the switch, that's when the courage part takes place. Okay, here we go. I do this. Make sure I do this. It just takes 15, 20 seconds to get yourself ready. Flip the switch, boom, you're in it. And you dive in with all your words. But that 20 seconds of courage thing is big.
What's the name of the book?
Well, I'm realizing that it's actually a novel I'm reading. W.E.B. Griffin. I'm reading a bunch of historic military novels. Characters to talks about. So it applies here too, though. I mean, I really do think that you've got to kind of get your mindset straight. There's a great movie that Kevin Costner is in, and I can't remember the name of it, but he's a pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. And he gets on the mound and he says, engage the mechanism. And the crowd noise disappears, his focus is right on the catcher. And
That's
boom.
the love of the game.
That's exactly what it is. One of my favorite all-time movies. I'm a Detroit Tiger fan from way back. But it's really remarkable to see him kind of go, and then do his thing.
That's cool.
So I think we ought to figure out a way to close it down and be focused, all that stuff. And for me, it does start at the very beginning. What am I going to do to get that switch?
So you say that 1980 was a good year, and that two very important things happened. I'm going to make sure we're recording when we walk up there, because I don't see a little light. So tell us about the two things that happened in 1980 that were kind of great.
Well, I graduated college in '79, and there were no jobs available. I was the geography major with a minor in environmental studies, and which did my dad's like, really? Why? Well, I mean, that's part of this story, though. So my sophomore year, I was trying to find an easy class for the fall. I had football, I had practice, I was spending 10 hours a day doing football stuff, and I still needed to have classes, so I signed up for this class called Industrial Location Theory. And it was a subtitle of Why Some Communities Grow and Some Don't. And I'm thinking, how hard can this be, man? It's geography. Give me a map, I can draw some circles, and it's going to work fine. So it was being taught by a visiting professor, a guy named Prentice Knight, who I've still not been able to track down since then. And I was hooked. I took the first 2 classes, I'm like, wow, this is fascinating to me. How communities grew, why they grew, how the natural resources around them made a difference, how transportation mattered, how people mattered, how logistics mattered, all that stuff. And so all of a sudden I realized this easy course, this gut course that I was trying to find, was actually going to point me in the direction of finding my passion, what I wanted to do for a career. And so everything I did after that, all the classes I took had something to do with business development, economic development, community development, marketing, economics, something that would be related to how you help communities grow, that kind of stuff. Basically, it was a planning or development degree, but Dartmouth didn't have a planning or development degree. So I had to get it through the geography department. So I got a degree in urban geography and environmental studies. And so when I got home in 1980s, the economy was really pretty bad. And I got my first job in Monroe, Michigan, which I think probably is, I remember this is 1980, so I went a year working in a fitness facility because I couldn't find a job. So I was if you go to the trainer, you see these physical trainers now, that's what I did to help you play racquetball, lift weights, all that kind of stuff. I got a job in Monroe County, Michigan, which is between Detroit and Toledo, Ohio, right down in the southeast corner of Michigan, Lake Erie. At the Monroe County Planning Department, working for a guy named Royce Manning. And I was being paid the princely sum of $10,500 a year. So I was basically making $5 an hour. My college education cost me 40 grand a year. It would cost somebody 40 grand a year, but anyway, it wasn't me, still 40 grand a year plus expenses, and I get 10 grand for my first job. My dad thinks I'm out of my mind. He wants me to go work at the auto plant, because even then they were still hiring, although the economy was pretty soft. So anyway, I get this job, and I start working on economic development financing projects. Back then, interest rates were ridiculous, and we were trying to find cheap ways to finance projects, and so I was learning how to do that. And I was doing zoning ordinances and that kind of stuff. So I was going to small towns and sitting in front of county councils and township boards and convincing them of what the zoning ordinance says and whether they should approve this stuff. And so I worked there for about a year, and then found a job in Flint, Michigan, doubling my salary. Wow, I went to $23,000 a year. I thought I was that was great. Going to Flint, and Flint at that time was doing badly. If you ever saw the movie, Something You Mean, it was written by Michael Moore, who is Roger and Me. Yes, I was going to say Charlie. I knew that was wrong.
Marley and Me. That's about dog.
Yes. Too many B's. So Roger and Me. Roger Smith was the chairman of General Motors at the time, and Michael Moore did this expose about how bad GM was back in the 80s, and Flint was the center of GM being bad. 25% unemployment. One day you would call the meeting together and announce they were laying off 186,000. They were laying off 86,000 people in Clinton one day, and probably never hiring back more than 60,000. The world just changed in that day. But I was doing economic development. Very tough place to do economic development. But I did get 2 things out of it. One, I met my wife there. And so if nothing else worked out from Clinton, that's when we met and were married. So best decision I ever made in my career. And the second was that for some reason, the powers that be then felt that Flint could be competitive, trying to convince companies from around the world, particularly Europe, to come invest in Flint, Michigan. And so they sent me a 25-year-old kid on a plane to Europe, to Zurich, to a thing called Invest in American Cities. Invest in American Cities is a trade show where companies from Europe can come to Zurich and see communities like ours who were displaying our wares so they could kind of shop for an American location all in one place without having to leave the country, without having to leave the continent. So I'm in Zurich, we set the trade show up, we're doing all this stuff. And getting close to the end, and there had been a boatload of every night receptions, and I'd stayed particularly late at this one, and it was really late and really dark. And I'm walking down this alley, and I had really too much to drink, and just kind of getting back to my hotel, I wanted to go to bed. And I physically run into somebody who's coming from the other corner. So he's coming this way, I'm coming this way, bang, we run into each other. And I look up and say, hey, I'm sorry. I look up, it's Bill Morris, and Bill Morris was the was on my board. It was on the was a school superintendent in Monroe, Michigan. And I'd run into him when I was down there. He goes, David, what are you doing here? I said, oh, here for this purpose. He said he was there for a convention, so we did what neither of us did. We went to the nearest bar and had this and drink. And in the middle of that conversation, he said, what are you doing now? And I told him, he says, well, you know, you ought to, we're starting this new industrial development corporation in Monroe, Michigan. You ought to consider applying for it. I said, look, I mean, I'm 25 years old. I've got maybe 2 years of experience in this. I mean, what's the likelihood of even being considered? He said, well, I'm the chair of the search committee. I said, really? Let's have another drink. And so, so I got home and I sent them my resume and a letter, and 6 weeks later, I was the new first president of the Monroe County Industrial Development Corporation. So this 2 degrees of separation thing, it's not 6 for anybody in the world. I really don't think it's really closer to 2.
You just never know.
You never know what you're going to run into, what you're going to do, and all the relationships that you build along the way, even though you don't know if there's going to be any value in them, you got to pay attention to them. And you got to think about everybody that you work with. I mean, whether you disagree with them or not on policy or politics, whatever it is, you really don't want to burn bridges. There's no good reason to. I mean, there really is never a good reason to burn a bridge. I'm not suggesting there's not a good reason to avoid people that you just don't respect or maybe don't have the ethics that you want and that kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. But publicly embarrassing people or showing yourself out in public, you never know who's paying attention and how that could affect something down the road that you would never have dreamed of. So my mother and father's, continued hammering, behave yourself in public, behave yourself in public. That stuff has always resonated with me. I think it's applied in my whole career has been about finding people who in the end will make a difference and being mentored and accepting risk when you need to in order to make the next change. So that whole 1980 thing worked out, Monroe to Flint, back down to Monroe, and then the career continued.
So 80s was a fun time for fashion. And when I do this with women, you actually get to see a lot of interesting hairdos and stuff. But here you go, there you are, David. Does he look suave or what? Yeah, there you go, without the beard. Now, this is actually an interesting story, isn't it?
Yeah, so I didn't always dress like that. I got it back from Zurich, and it was Halloween night. And that's Maggie, my wife on the right there. She met me at the airport dressed like that, saying we're going to a Halloween party, and here's your costume, and that's what she brought me to wear. So I was kind of a disco dude, and that night I proposed. So it was one of those, we got to talk. She says, you're not being very obvious, are you? I'm like, we got to talk. I'm like, the talk on the way home to the place, we got to talk. I didn't even have the ring yet. I just said, we got to get married. And so that's an important night. This was Maggie's 30th birthday. We had a big party for her to surprise her. And that's her wedding.
So just so you know, he's in style, with what was contemporary.
So disco was in, and long before I met my wife, when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, you went to discos at night. That's what you did. I mean, the club scene then was, if you think about the John Travolta stuff that you might have seen, that's what it was like. And so we would get dressed up in silk shirts and shoes with heels and hip hugger pants and all that kind of stuff.
I would pay money to see you.
And we would dance all night long. It was a blast. And we still love to dance. Maggie and I still love to dance at weddings and that kind of stuff. It's one of our favorite.
Okay, so I'm going to walk through some of these career things, and I want to get to a couple of the important transformational changes that you led in a couple of your roles in the chamber. So, President of Monroe County Industrial Development Corporation, and that was at 26, if I'm not mistaken, that you were.
Yes.
85 to 95 VP of Economic Development. You went to Fort Wayne, with my grandparents' hometown. And spent some time there. And then went to Greenville Chamber of Commerce in South Carolina. Just a quick synopsis of how did you go from being industrial development, president of the Industrial Development Corporation, into the world of chambers?
Okay, so I was recruited to go be the vice president of economic development at the Fort Wayne Chamber. And so we did really well at the IDC in Monroe, had a couple of successful years, and then decided I was recruited to go to Fort Wayne. Took that job. We had a larger budget, larger staff, a larger community, and so it was a step up in the career. And then by 89, it was pretty clear to me that I wasn't going to go anywhere in that chamber. My boss at that time was not going anywhere by his own choice. And so I started looking around, and I had a job offer for another economic development organization in the western part of the state. When I told my board, the volunteers of the board, that I was leaving, they told me I couldn't leave because they had just fired my boss and they wanted me to be the president. And I told them, even I still contend this, you need to communicate better, dude. I mean, if that was in your thought process, you would have saved me just weeks and weeks and weeks of angst and process and house hunting and all that stuff. So I stayed and was president of that chamber. We became a really good, effective chamber, I think. We kept doing economic development work, and we kept making things happen. And I was recruited to go to Greenville, South Carolina to run that chamber. And so we looked at it and said, here's an adventure. We've never lived in the South. So we thought, let's give it a shot. Greenville's a really nice town. I mean, from a geography and weather and all that kind of good stuff. And they had a lot of potential. So it was fun to be recruited to Greenville and start the process there of really transforming that chamber and their economic development.
And it seems to me that that season for you was a really clear season of transformative moral leadership, catalytic moral leadership, perhaps. And the Olympics came to the United States in '96, and you have a story that actually connects.
Sure. So we're a stone's throw from Atlanta in '96. So we had, and the Olympic torch was going to come through our city. So we planned a big international celebration, and it was going to last a week, and it was all around the torch coming in, staying the night, and then leaving the next day. There was a group of folks on the far Christian right who were deciding that they didn't like the politics of the U.S. Olympic Committee. And so they were trying to embarrass them, and particularly their policy on allowing homosexuals into the Olympics. They didn't like it, they didn't want the country to accept it. And so their plan of attack was to convince counties along the torch route to pass ordinances that would basically say that if you're not heterosexual, you're not welcome in our community. And unfortunately, they only convinced 2 counties to do it. One was the one I was in, and one was Cobb County, Georgia. And so the Olympic Committee basically said, fine, we'll just go around you. We'll just reroute and we'll go around you. Well, we had spent lots of time and money developing this festival, number one. But number two, we just felt absolutely miserable about the fact that we were going to get painted with this brush that 7 county council people could paint the community with. So we aggressively went after the county and said they needed to change the policy. They refused to do it. So we went to the Olympic Committee and negotiated a compromise where they would, because our city limits had passed an opposite ordinance that said everybody's welcome in our community. We shrouded the torch when it got to the county line, shrouded it until it got to the city limits, unshrouded when it got in the city, did our torch run, did our festival, carried out the next day when it got to the city limits, got shrouded again until it got to the next county line, and it continued. And then Cobb County followed that same process. So the Olympic Committee got to keep the route, but we ultimately worked our way around it. South Carolina is a beautiful place, but the politics there are absolutely horrendous. And so, if any of you have background in South Carolina, I'm sorry if I don't mean to insult you here, but the politics of personal destruction is king there. And so as soon as you disagree with a politician, you have an enemy for life. And so basically a third of the politicians that we had to work with every day, all of a sudden we're no longer going to work with me personally or with the chamber. So just keep that in mind, because there's obviously 2 or 3 more steps where I burned the bridge with everybody else. And as a result, left South Carolina realizing I need to go somewhere I can be more effective. So we did the right thing, but it cost us some work, but that's the stuff.
Well, it didn't end there. So this is your young family at the time, right? And you had another, quote, opportunity. Again, this is the man who really says don't burn bridges and maintain relationships with everyone. And it had to do with the flag.
Yeah, so at the time, back in 1962, the legislature in South Carolina voted to put the Confederate battle flag on top of the state capitol dome in order to commemorate the Civil War. And then they passed a law that said it can't be removed except by an act of the legislature. So fast forward to when I was there in late 90s, early 2000s, and our companies are saying we can't recruit people to this environment. you know, we're truly going to be an inclusive, diverse place with inclusive culture and grow this place. We've got to be able to be very successful attracting them, and we can't do it with that flag. So we were the largest chamber in the state and the only progressive chamber politically, and so they came to us and said, we want you to take the flag off the dome. Now remember, I'm a Yankee, first of all. I'm a damn Yankee to about a third of the politicians. And a carpetbagger to boot, because I'm not going to stay there for the rest of my life. And at the time, we ended up having we had 4 legislators who were on our side. And we had to get to 27, I think it was, in the House. And we had to get to 47 in the House, and we had to get to 27 in the Senate. And so we led the charge to get the flag off the dome, and we got it done.
So, okay, but before and after here,
Yep.
and it ended up
there. So the only negotiation, now it looks bad, but to move it off the dome to a relatively obscure Confederate War memorial on the State House grounds was a major coup. Now at the time, that whole thing was surrounded by big trees that you barely knew was there. And so basically we hit it. But it was the only way we could get the NAACP and the folks who were supporters of the flag and all the politicians in the room figure out a way to make that happen. So it came down, and we basically burned a whole bunch of bridges after that.
and there was cost to you and your family.
Yeah, we had death threats. I sent my family away for about 8 weeks during the summer. I couldn't have my 16-year-old son drive his car around because we were afraid that people would know his truck and that something might happen. I mean, it was a very ugly, nasty time. And honestly, I didn't want them to be around to hear me getting castigated every chance that they got in the media. And so they went off, went to Michigan for a couple of months in the summertime. And I make it sound a little flippant, but it was a very serious thing at the time. But we were committed enough that we weren't going to let it deter us from the project. So sometimes doing the right thing can be painful, but sometimes doing the right thing can also give you energy long into the future when you think you're in something tough and you're like, this is nothing compared to what I had to do back then. It kind of gives you some energy when you need it.
So what happened after that? A little change.
Yeah, so then we did the other ultimate bad thing in South Carolina, supported a tax increase. South Carolina was paying about $4,000 a year per student in schools, and they had the second worst, maybe the third worst school system in the country. And we were bound to bet that we were going to fix that. And so we started a big thing on education reform that the chamber led. Ended up supporting a bond issue that would pay for new schools. And that pretty much wiped out any political support that we had. Anywhere that left, they said, well, geez, we can't support you anymore either. So in April of that year, Maggie and I had a long conversation and realized that I couldn't be effective doing what I was doing. I was probably doing the community more harm than good by sticking around being in this job. So I started having conversations with our board, and next thing we know, by June or so, we decided that we're going to separate from the chamber. I gave them until August. I was helping them transition and stuff. And so I started doing consulting. We had this house that we'd been renovating for 10 years and had this 3-acre garden that we built up from nothing but grass, and had this beautiful place that I thought Maggie probably didn't want to leave. And so I started doing private consulting. It was doing okay. And one day she came to me and said, I don't understand why you're doing this. What do you mean? She said, well, you're not happy. You're happy as making communities grow, and that's not what you're doing. So why aren't you applying for jobs in other chambers? I said, well, I didn't think you wanted to move. She said, look, it's a house. Now, I knew that that's how she was, but to have her just kind of look in the eye and say, that doesn't matter. This is all fun, but let's make sure that we're happy both sides of the equation. So that day, it was July, I'll never forget. I looked on the internet, looked for jobs that were available, and there were 2 chambers of significance that had jobs open in Omaha and Wichita. And so that turned out to be the last day that resumes were going to be accepted in Omaha. So if she hadn't had that conversation with me, and she hadn't forced me to get on the computer and start looking, I wouldn't have gotten my application in here in time, and my life would have changed dramatically. So a whole bunch of weeks later, I ended up having a job here and moved the family here, and it's been a blast for the last 15 years.
So came to Omaha from South Carolina. I love these pictures. I love these pictures.
Yeah, I don't. That one I don't leave out there. You're allowed to forget about. That was 100 pounds ago.
Yeah. You've had a lot of physical transformations, some miracles with that as well. So I've been here 9.5 years now in Omaha. I got married for the first time at almost 50. Moved from Chicago to Omaha. And one of the first things I did was became acquainted with the chamber. And the first annual meeting I went to, Warren Buffett was the speaker, and like when I would tell my clients elsewhere in the country, oh yeah, I was just at a meeting with Warren Buffett, you could see the drool coming down their faces, you know. And we would have these annual meetings where everyone was like, yeah, Omaha rocks, Omaha is great, we're the best. And I will never, and I've shared this with you before, I'll never forget, I was at one of the annual meetings, and it talked about how much better these other cities were. And the last sound and vision of the video you showed was of a woman's heels walking away down the aisle on a marble floor. So you could hear that click, click, clicking. And it didn't say, Omaha is great. It said, wow, these other cities are doing better than Omaha. And then I found your slides from 2015. Couldn't find the ones from this spring. And so this was the beginning of We Don't Coast. And you began posting some barometers, comparing Omaha to other places, and having some clear development goals that are comparing us to other cities. And so one of the important things in change is creating this sense of urgency and discontent with the status quo. And I'd like for you to talk about that a little bit and where we're going as a city, because this campaign, if I was to flip through the slides, but we'll do it, it's supposed to end in 2015, so if I was to pop it up, it would say, or 2018, 2015, 2018. You talk about something called catalytic leadership, which is leadership when you do not have the authority to make things happen. And as the CEO of Chambers of Commerce, you have a track record of making things happen, and having vision to make things happen, and creating alliances. And so tell us about where we're going, tell us about why this happened, tell us about where we're going under your leadership, your collaborative leadership, and what is the role of collaborative leadership in that?
So we were getting some really good press, if you think about it, this community really from about 2006, even during the recession. And I was starting to feel like there was some complacency setting in, that everybody was believing our press clippings, and that we were top 10 of this, top 5 of that, hitting all of our economic development targets, employing a bunch of people, seeing cool projects happen. And so I was actually in Charleston and saw that they had done what they call a barometer, where they compared themselves against peer cities, competitive cities, and aspirational cities. And so we asked them if we could steal their process, and they said, of course. And so we came here and did our own barometer. We have the Bureau of Economic Research, thank you, at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln do the research for us. And so we identified 3 aspirational cities, Austin, Raleigh, Durham, and Nashville. 3 competitive cities, Des Moines, Kansas City, and Oklahoma City. And 3 peer cities, Louisville, Colorado Springs, and Salt Lake City, Utah. There's reasons for all of those. But in the end, we wanted to show, if we had 8 indices, and each of those indices has, I think, 5 or 6 measures in it, how we compare to those other cities. And what we found is that we're middle of the pack. In some of the individual components of the indices, we do really well, and some of the individual components of the indices we don't do as well. But in many of them, in most of them, we end up number 5 or 6. And the first time we showed that to our board was really kind of silent, and they didn't buy the data, particularly the data about Des Moines. Des Moines is the Achilles heel of our board, I found. They hate it when Des Moines does something better than we do. I don't know why that's the case, but that's the case. Because we already think we're better than Kansas City, so we don't want to give them a second thought. But Des Moines, for some reason, just rankles our board if it shows that they're doing something that we want to do. So the first thing they did was send us back because we don't believe the data. We need to have somebody else validate the data. So we had somebody else come in and validate the data. Every year we add a few more indices because we see other things that we can measure. But in the end, we haven't really changed the relative comparison between us because they keep growing like we keep growing. In many cases, we're growing faster than we are. In some areas, we're doing better than them. In other areas, we're not. But in the end, it's a great comparison we've been doing now for 8 years. And so it's something that the board expects to see every year. What that led us to, though, was, we're the economic development organization in this region, and so we had to build, every 5 years, to build an economic development strategy. And we raised a bunch of money and we hit these goals, and we're in the last year now of our last 5-year strategy. And we've already accomplished all the goals that we set back in the day. And so if you think about what's happened, that by the end of this year, from 2004 to today, we're going to be really close on these really good round numbers. $10 billion in capital investment in projects that we've worked on, 40,000 jobs and 1,000 projects. And of those 1,000 projects, half of them are new companies to the market. So we've grown the market substantially with companies that we've worked with. 40,000 people plus are out there working today because of the work that we've done. And the capital investment is pretty remarkable to think about how that pays for all the services that, that we need. That doesn't happen if you don't have capital investment. So we've been pretty proud of that work. However, we still have found that there are challenges, pockets of poverty, young professional angst, talent shortages. I mean, a lot of things that we need, that we knew that we just weren't impacting the way we wanted to impact it as a result of the strategic planning efforts that we've been doing. So last year, we hired Rebecca Ryan to come in as a futurist to lead us for about a year's work. So we're the first chamber to have a futurist in residence. That was pretty cool to be able to say that. And she stayed with us for 9 months. We partnered with United Way and the Urban League in Nebraska to think about what Omaha could be in 2040. And it wasn't a strategic plan. It was really an effort to get almost 1,000 people involved in giving us their dreams about what Omaha could be. And when we say Omaha, we talk about the Omaha region, 6 counties that we represent in economic development. And so we knew that there were going to be some things coming out of that, what could Omaha be, that would not necessarily be on the chamber's agenda. Things that we want to see happen, but it wasn't our responsibility, it wasn't our mission. But we knew there were other people in the city or the state that would have that responsibility. So we're in the midst of this process, actually thinking about the process, and I jumped one step first. In 2015, we did our normal YP survey every few years, and the Young Professional Survey came back, and it showed us some very disturbing things, particularly that people of color were 6 times less likely to recommend Omaha as a place to live, work, and play to their friends and relatives than their white counterparts. That was a challenge, and we didn't know what caused that, and so we then partnered with the Urban League Young Professional Group and ours to do a follow-on survey to try and figure out if we get some details. What could we do to impact some of this? And then that group ended up making some recommendations. And those recommendations have flowed directly into this vision process. That's why I had to do a sidebar, because the stuff that we learned from that in a very significant way informed the work that we're trying to do in our 2040 work. So imagine a 2040 plan that says, if we wanted to be that, what disruptions do we have to cause to happen, or do we need to avoid in order to make sure we can accomplish that future? And then we backcasted was the term that they used, and tried to figure out, if I have to back plan from that, what steps do I take in 2019 in order to have that process move forward? And so our economic development strategy came out of that 2040 foundation piece, and is necessarily narrower than the 2040 vision, because again, the chamber doesn't have responsibility for everything. We seem to have our hands in everything, but we aren't responsible for leading the charge in those things. So we pulled a program that's called Prosper 2.0 that basically describes what we can do to help accomplish the prosperity vision that we put out there for 2040, the people part of that strategy, and also the place part of that strategy. So I've got a couple of things I'm going to read to you just because I haven't been able to memorize this yet, so I apologize. But we had a bunch of statements that were made that kind of describe where we're trying to take the community and then in people, place, and prosperity. So let me read those things so you can kind of see this is not your traditional strategic plan that says we're going to go from A to B, it's going to take us 5 years, it's going to cost us this, and then we're going to do this and this and this and this and this, and we can measure it like this. That's not what the 2040 plan was about. It was about engaging people in a big dream that we think is accomplishable if we take the right steps and work together, right? So first off, it's 2040, and Greater Omaha has emerged as one of America's great next generation regions. Now pay attention to all the words here. There's not a lot of words, but each one of them was put in here for a very specific reason. So we're now considered a next generation region, noted for our cultural diversity and the private, public, and civic sector commitment to innovation, entrepreneurship, and excellence, The region is a high-growth, high-tech economy, a net importer of talent, that has amassed an impressive record of best places accolades. You can find that on the website, and you can kind of digest each word you want, but it basically describes this pretty remarkable place that if you lived here, you'd be really proud of, and that you want to show off to people, that people will talk about whether they are here or not. And then we realized that the important parts of this agenda were about the people, and what does it take to keep and attract people? It comes down to where they want to live, what kind of place they want to live in, and what kind of a career they want to have. So for us, it came down to business growth, place, and people. And so the people statement is Greater Omaha is changing. We're aging, and our next generation is more diverse and more educated. Our people strategy focuses on developing, retaining, and attracting talent. This is the important line here, though, and ensuring that every resident can get their foot on the rung of the economic ladder and climb as high as their skills and ambitions will take them. We wanted to create a place where prosperity was possible for everybody. So that's basically the goal we think about out there. It doesn't matter with the programs that we're doing. We think that they matter because they'll get us there, but ultimately the direction is if you want to, you should be able to do well. And let's put a thing in place to make sure that you can do that. And then place, great cities have a vibe that says there's something going on here. How can Greater Omaha be one of the most inspirational places in the world, where your senses, what you see and hear and taste and touch, confirm our extraordinary attributes? So again, all around us, we should be able to recognize the signs of greatness and the signs of innovation and incredible place. And we should work towards that. And then finally on business growth, welcome to a new trajectory of growth focused on building the capacity and competitiveness of our core industries and nurturing a dynamic ecosystem of innovation and startups. So again, a very different kind of approach. So we have now developed a Prosper 2.0 strategy that comes out of that plan. We got 3 new things that I'll talk about real quick, and then we really should get into some Q&A here. On the business growth stuff, you expect us to do business recruitment, business retention, small business assistance, entrepreneurship, that kind of stuff. But we're really focused on quality and the importance of startups and the fact that we can build our own large companies here by starting up a number of really great high-tech companies. And so we've got a target of 250 tech startups over the next 5 years that will generate more than 10,000 jobs and more than $50,000 a year. So just think about the impact just that one particular piece has, and you can see that we're thinking about quality rather than quantity. On the people side, there's a lot of very specific goals we're trying to hit, but basically it says there's a lot of talent pipelines that need to be managed so that the folks in that pipeline get the training the education they need, the training that they need, and they land in careers here that make a difference for them and for our economy. And there's a big piece about diversity and inclusion that we've never done before that recognizes that if Omaha is going to be more diverse over the next 20 years, as we are, we're going to be a predominantly non-white population here by 2040 in the city of Omaha. And in the region, we're going to be, by 2050, we'll be a predominantly non-white population. Are we ready for that? Culturally, as a community, amenities as a community, culturally as businesses, or even from an inclusivity and diversity perspective. We don't think we are, and so we've jumped in with both feet and said, we're going to lead the business community's discussion, in this discussion, the community that's already going on, about how can the business community be more aggressive about ensuring more diverse employers and more inclusive employers, which then leads into more inclusive communities. And then finally recognizing that place is really important. People now choose where they want to live before they choose where they want to work. I mean, what do we need to do to make this that kind of place that people choose? And one of the first things that people talk about is spectacular places. So we announced a riverfront development project that's probably more spectacular than we'll see anywhere. I'd like to say that was a direct result of our process. It wasn't, but we'll claim it anyway. What is more important is that transit became a big part of this process, that we need to be able to move people more efficiently through the region. Eventually through the state too, but certainly through the region. So if people want to have a great job and they get trained, they live in North Omaha, they live in a car, how are they going to get to the job in Sarpy County or Cass County? We got to fix that. And so we've got a significant transportation agenda that the Chamber's putting as part of our economic development strategy. You can find all of this on the Chamber's website at omahachamber.org. A lot more detail there, but those are the three things that stand out that make this a different strategy than the kind of things we've done.
And then or if you Google Omaha Chamber Vision 2040 as well, that'll all pull up. So it's vision.
Right.
So the course is a course on leading change, and I want to help set the trajectory of some of our questions of David, perhaps. And you've got a handout here that is from one of the primary texts that the course is using from David Pottruck. And one of the things that David Brown is exceptional at is is the entire model, but really he talked about these first three steps, which is establishing the need to change in a sense of urgency, and you heard his creating a spirit of competition and comparing us to other cities, unifying a team. This is his collaborative approach. And then what he's just shared with us and read to us was this develop and communicate a clear and compelling vision of the future. And I like to say that the vision of the future has to be compelling enough that people want to go through the hell that they have to go through to get there, because it's hard. And so you've heard this vision casting. Oh, thanks, David. You've heard this vision casting coming from David. But this is an opportunity to dialogue with David about leadership, about change. And so I'll help with that, David. Why don't you?
That'll work.
What questions do you have for David?
So I've known you for some years, or I've seen kind of the evidence of your leadership throughout some of these years that you've been in Omaha. But how she just termed it as vision casting. What's your process or what's your brainstorm method in order for you to cast out this vision or this new initiative to your team and then allow for them to get buy-in, or what does that process look like for you? Because I mean, you might read something, be inspired, but then how do you collectively get everyone else on board to be able to create those words and create this vision or make it into action?
That's a great question. So it depends upon who you're trying to motivate to do something. So let's talk about what we do internally. Staff loves that I'm going on vacation. I take every July, I take a whole month off. I just go away. Turn off the phone, disappear. Don't call the office, don't do anything. But I don't do any kind of time off between January and June. And so burn the candle at both ends for 6 months, go get the batteries recharged, and then come back and do it for the next 5 or 6 months. It's kind of how I've done things ever since I've been here, and for a lot of years before in Greenville. And the reason that my staff is really happy I'm going on vacation is because I'm constantly ideating, constantly coming back and, hey, I read this thing, I saw this thing, and we gotta throw something against the wall and see if it sticks. And I'm blessed with a team that says, yeah, it didn't stick. Or, yeah, it shouldn't stick. Or, God, that's a great idea, let's figure out a way to try and accomplish that. And mostly, they also try and figure out how to do it within the framework of things that we're already doing. So I'm rarely coming in and saying, we got to get involved in this new agenda. You're trying to figure out where you really are, what's your sweet spot. And the first idea is letting yourself continue to ideate so that people are not surprised when Angel has a new idea and she wants me to buy into it. So first off, part of your psyche should be, how am I always thinking about how can I improve things? I always tell people they have to be looking about what's coming over the next hill. Gary Gage was great about that at OPPD, and he was our chairman. He'd say, I don't really care about the problems that we're going to have this year and next year. What I'm really concerned about are the ones we're not paying attention to. They're going to come 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road. And so you have to train yourself to think that way, I think. So first off, you got to get used to ideating and communicating those ideas to people. And I think that's the first part of catalytic leadership. So I agree with Janyne. Catalytic leadership is different than just change leadership. We are all forced to deal with change. I personally like to cause change rather than receive change. And I've built a lot of my career around causing enough change to happen that there's no room for change to be foisted upon. Because I hate having to respond to somebody else's agenda. And so a lot of the work that we do is try and build process so that we at least know the change that we're trying to cause is, if not instigated by us, something we're very committed to, and then we're going to move down the path. So that starts with people believing that you can come up with a good idea every now and then. Now, you also gotta remember that you gotta have an ego you put in your back pocket, because not every idea is a good one. So if you're gonna ideate a lot, you gotta assume that a lot of that stuff's just not gonna go anywhere. And then, you gotta be able to take the next step. And that is show people that you can turn an idea into action. And what I've found is that it is never about me being able to do the action. It's about us being able to do the action. So who else do I find in my organization when I'm doing something internally that will get emotionally attached to this process when we move forward? And for me, it doesn't matter if it's our receptionist down front or if it's one of our senior vice presidents who's responsible for a big part of our business. I don't really care who it is who can get emotionally charged about it, because they then will have a circle of influence that they might be able to bring to the table who will also be charged about it. So let's go back to it, it's our receptionist. I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, but she's probably the person that's most removed from the strategic development process of the chamber. But if she comes up with something and can get 7 or 8 or 10 of her cohorts to say, yeah, this is something we're going to do, chances are we'll be successful in getting it done. So what does that mean I've got to be able to do with that? We as an organization have to be able to do with everyone in our organization. They got to know what we're doing. Because if the receptionist can get 8 or 10 people to do something that she wants them to do, and it's way outside our mission, that's a negative effort. That's me saying, no, we can't go there. I don't want to see that happen. So the second thing you got to do is make sure people know what your mission is, where you're supposed to be playing, and then find people that can be emotionally attached to this new idea that you've got. You've got to have people, though, even if they get emotionally attached, they're willing to be candid with you and say it's a good idea or a bad idea. So a lot of it is about getting to know the people that you're working with, people that you socialize with. Who can I bounce ideas off of that will give me really good, relevant feedback? If you think about what we're doing here, we're saying I'm building the ability to ideate, understanding my team, I'm operating within the venue, the mission of my organization. And now I'm trying to find people that are going to be willing to sort of roll up their sleeves and make something happen within the organization. So you've been working this process. If you do all this work, the next time you have the idea, it is not unexpected that you've come up with that idea and you built a base of people who are willing to listen. Mostly because you've also assessed what they're interested in. So, if I come to you, Angel, and say, I really want you to lead the charge on bringing a new soccer team to town. If you're not a soccer fan, yeah, not so much. I mean, you'll do it because the boss asked you to do it, but that's just not going to be the thing that drives you. And chances are you're not going to be excited when you talk to other people about it. But if I can find that thing that I know just really gets you excited about this community, I know that you're going to figure out a way to run with it and come back to me with some really great ideas about how we can implement that change. Okay? If you're doing things externally, it's not a whole lot different than that. It's just you have less control. You have more possibilities of people, and more possibility of partners and organizations, which means it takes longer to get something done because you don't want to be the only person in the ecosystem that's not talking to the rest of the people in that ecosystem. So in this diversity and inclusion space that we're playing in right now, it's not like there's nobody working in that right now. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of organizations that are worried about how do we make this a more diverse and inclusive place. So we're not going to jump in and say, ta-da, the chamber's here, save the day, we are now immediately diverse and inclusive. We have to realize who these other players are, and frankly, we probably don't have any experience working with them over the past 20 years. Short of the United Way and the Urban League, we have long-term relationships with. There's lots of organizations out there that are in the space that we don't know, they don't know us. They're probably skeptical of our commitment to this. They're wondering why all of a sudden we're interested. We're jumping into their space where nobody's paid attention to them before. They're wondering why in the world? And so we're working the process and getting people on board and finding out where we can be successful and where we can't. And so outside is just a bigger pool of people that you gotta get on board. So it still comes down to the same thing though. People are used to me coming up with ideas. They're used to the chamber coming up with stuff to do. They're used to us trying to convene people and collaborate with people, and they're used to us figuring out a way to solve problems and move forward. So as long as we can have that positive interaction with people, we think we can make it happen. Does that help?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question?
I have a question, kind of off of part of your answer to Angel, and one of these points, just kind of what's your philosophy or how does the chamber or you individually kind of go about recruiting and empowering the broader team? Kind of like you said, there's a lot of partners, there's a lot of other people who maybe are really passionate about certain things how the chamber wants to enact change around, and how do you recruit those people, how do you empower them to kind of work with the plan and kind of talk to?
Can you repeat that question first so we're sure to catch it on?
Yes, just the
Oh.
question about how he, or the chamber recruits and empowers the
The
broader
broader
team around, chamber initiatives, around things to create change.
So internally, that's again one answer, and externally, it's another. We're building our team, right now in order to accomplish some of these new things that are in Prospect 2.0. So as you know, we just hired a diversity inclusion manager, director. We've just hired a transportation director to lead our transit planning process, and so we're gearing up so we have the individual expertise on the team to speak the language, to engage with the ecosystem. So there are people that are already somehow knowledgeable of that ecosystem. So like any other team that you might work with, you gotta make sure you got the right expertise on the team and someone providing that leadership. Our biggest asset, and probably our biggest challenge too though, is engaging outside the chamber employees and board and engaging in the community. Last year we counted 65 external partners. That's not people, that's organizations that we partner with. And so our first effort is to figure out who is in this ecosystem. I use that term a lot because to me it just defines the spectrum of A to Z of what's already going on, and you can find gaps. This is the old sentence diagramming stuff that nuns taught me back in the day. You know, we lay things out and figure out what everything is, and there's gaps, and you gotta fill those gaps with something. And so we use that term all the time. And so a lot of what we do is try and figure out who's in this ecosystem and who's engaged in that ecosystem that's already engaged with us in some way. So the YPs are a really good example. We have this 7,000 group of people that are in this amazing diverse group of activities and ecosystems around town. And inevitably we find people who are in these new agendas who are young professionals engaged with us already. And so they then can introduce us to other people who introduce us to other people, and so the network starts getting built. We also find some of our biggest companies here in town have internal activities with really great people that are focused on some of the issues we're involved in too. So we can go to the UPs and say, who do you have that's focused on this? And then they can tell us who they're engaged with in the community. So an awful lot of it gets back to that 2 degrees of separation. Who do we know in the community that might know somebody that could help us engage here? I spent virtually all day yesterday meeting with different organizations that I had really not known very well. So I've met with their executive directors or their presidents, whatever it might be, talking about diversity, inclusion, and talent. Just trying to figure out, is there an ability for a relationship of some sort? And what's really interesting, in all those organizations, there were at least a couple of volunteers from the chamber that were already involved with them. So we're blessed that we already have 1,000+ volunteers and several thousand young professionals that want to get engaged. We just got to make sure we can tap that resource as well as we can. Does that get to your question?
Someone else?
How have you prepared for roadblocks? It sounds like a lot of the change that you've made has been quite difficult, especially in South Carolina. Going into those situations, I'm sure you knew some of the things that were going to be difficult. How did you practically plan for those roadblocks?
I don't know that I planned for them. I guess I anticipated them is probably better term. I knew somewhere or another someone was going to start slinging something. Just didn't quite know how to respond until I saw the ferocity level or the consistency or those type of things. So most of it was kind of the old term girding your loins or getting thick skin. A lot of it was just preparation for saying, something's going to happen today that I'm not going to like. And I probably need to be able to respond to that with a smile and some path forward. And without really knowing what that might be. Now then, once something happens, then you got to sit down and say, I can't just let this go without us having some response. And so I must admit, I guess preparation is part of it. You end up, you know who your fire team is, if you will. Who are the 2 or 3 people you're going to call on and say, okay, here's the problem. What are we going to do to fix it? So I'll give you a good example. When ConAgra announced that they're moving their headquarters to Chicago, we were in DC. The chamber was in DC with a group of about 30 or 40 business people visiting our delegation. And our 2 vice presidents, Ann Brannigan and Randy Phelan at the time, were there with me. And I get this email at 6:15 in the morning from Chris Kircher, who was on our board from ConAgra, and said, in 15 minutes, we're going to be issuing this email, this press release via email. and I want to give you notice of it. And this is after about a year of trying to get in front of ConAgra and talk to them about not moving, staying here, and we could never get in front of them. The two meetings we had with them were punctured. It was clear that they weren't listening. And so we were just waiting for the axe to drop. And so at 6:30, all of a sudden, the announcement comes. They're moving their headquarters to Chicago. They're taking 300 jobs with them. They're laying off 1,000 people, but they're keeping 1,200 people. And I must admit we weren't happy. To say that we would have broke into the bourbon at 6:30 in the morning if it had been available and the bar was open, we might have, because it was not a good day. But we had to get on the bus and take these 50 business people to the Capitol. And so when we got into the meeting, after we were going to Gallup first, we got to Gallup, the three of us sat aside and said, how are we going to respond to this? We had two choices. We can be angst-filled and say, how dare they, and we're too good of a community, and kind of go along with the early trend in social media was kick the bums out, we should never have listened to them in the middle 80s, I mean, it was getting pretty bad. Or can we turn this to a positive in some way? And so what we realized is that with very low unemployment and a talent problem, that we could keep those 1,000 employees that they were laying off here in Omaha. It could be a real positive for us. And so we decided right then and there, the three of us, that we were not going to take the negative road, we were going to take the positive road. And here are 6 steps we need to take today before we get back to Omaha, so that by the time we get back to Omaha the next day, there were some things already in process. So by the time I got back to Omaha that night, got back to the office, I got to the office about 6 that Friday morning, and I already had 6 people lined up outside my office waiting for us just to flip the switch. And that switch was, we needed to do a website, we needed to get HR people together, we needed to start thinking about training, we needed to do a whole bunch of things we needed to do. And 10 minutes later, they were gone and doing their thing. And it made a huge difference. We basically said we were not going to be negative about this. We were going to say, we're behind these people that you laid off. We think they should stay here. Our talent stays here in Omaha. And the result of that was several hundred of them stayed here in Omaha. Several hundred of them are now employed in local companies. And those companies are getting really great people for that they would never expect to have been able to get. There was an effort by companies to kind of compete about how many we call the next cons that they would have. Our board would get together and they'd say, I got 6, well, I got 9, I got 12. And even the chamber, we had 2 or 3 in the chamber that are folks that used to work at ConAgra. And so it's an example of something happens that we kind of anticipated, but oh damn, it really happened. Now I had the right 2 people around me, and we got the right 3 or 4 people on the phone with us, even though we were in DC. And the next day, the team had gone into action, and boom, we got it done. So, but we set the table about how to do those things over the prior years, right? So.
I think we have time for one more question. One more?
To kind of piggyback off of that one, how do you decide? You said you have a team of when a problem comes that you pretty much go to about 2 or 3 people. How do you decide which problem to attack and respond to, and versus just letting that one go so that you don't get caught up in all the issues?
That's a really great question. I think there's more art to that than science. So I have a volunteer board, and I have about 3,000 members and several thousand volunteers at some time or another. And all of them have, I think, an impression of what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. And so my job really as the CEO of this organization is to make sure I don't get the organization in those things that are inconsistent with our mission or that will divide our membership. And that's probably my biggest concern is the whole divisive part of it. So to be a chamber member, you have to decide to write me a check every year. It's a discretionary thing. I can't send a bill collector to you and say, you promised to be a member, so write me a check. If they choose not to be a member, they choose not to be a member. And so they choose an organization that has a set of philosophies and processes and engagement that they believe is somewhat consistent with their own, right? So you know what a sine curve looks like. 10% of my members are on the far left politically, 10% of them are on the far right politically, everybody else is crowded around the middle. You would expect that. But most of our positions that we take tend to be around the middle. Because if we start taking positions or getting engaged in things that are far right or far left, we scare the rest of our members away, and we're not representing them well. So you can tell we get really close on something when we don't take a position. Gambling is a good example. When the big gambling thing was here, there were 3 or 4 years in a row when a gambling referendum came to the electorate. The year before I got here, the chamber took a position in favor of gambling. Excuse me, 2 years before I got here, they took a position in favor of gambling. The next year, they took a position in opposition to gambling. I got here, people say, so what do you think about gambling? And I said, well, obviously, we can't make up our mind. And so we actually went out and talked to all of our members and realized that half our members supported it and half our members didn't support it. We said, we can't make up our mind. So we're not going to. But here's the issues that we think ought to be addressed on those things. So for me, a lot of it is about, does it fit within our mission? What's our membership going to think about it? What's our board going to think about it? We represent a microcosm of our membership. And then we have councils that are kind of topic related, so public policy council, membership council, et cetera. How can I use that council to do the research that we need to do in order to make sure that we have the data and all the information so we can decide, yep, we're going to get engaged and here's why, or no, we're not going to get engaged and here's why, or we can't make a decision because the board doesn't want to, or our membership wants to. So it's more art than anything else. You kind of got to know resources, the people that are around you, the leadership around you, know what's doable. Because the other thing is, well, you can't be afraid to fail. You can't plan to fail. Okay, and so you got to be able to figure out, if I'm going to engage in this thing, can we actually be successful with it? And if we can't, what's the impact of our organization going to be? And if we are, where does that move the organization to? Sometimes success can be a pain in the butt because people want you to do more.
Yeah.
Well, if the chamber touches something, they're going to get it done. And so all of a sudden, you get, every time we solve some big problem or engage in something big, the floodgates open and people want us involved in their issue too. And that's really gratifying, but it's also challenging because you got to be able to say no to things that are just outside yourself.
Thank you, David.
One last trip.
Really quick.
Okay.
How many books a month do you read? And what's a good book that you've just recently finished or are reading right now?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you a little bit. I read about 100 books a year.
Disappoint? That's a disappointment?
Well, I disappoint because almost none of them are business books.
Oh,
Almost
that's
all of them
okay.
are just novels. I have about 15 or 20 authors that I like to read, and so I'm constantly reading, 2 or 3 books at a time, and it's kind of how I unwind. And so I'll go home and we'll sit and read. I know I sound pretty boring, I realize that, but Amazon loves me. And I read them all on this. I read all my books on this.
On your phone?
Yep, all on this. And I bought 100 books on Amazon last year, so I just read a lot.
You asked that question because what is the research on the top executives and most successful leaders that we know? Do you know what that research is?
I know, but I'm assuming that they read several books.
Yes, like every other week. They're reading a book every other week. And there's a good article, and I love Google. Harvard Business Press has a great article about how can you actually read a book every other week without, there's a methodology to it that many of us who don't necessarily enjoy or retain it. It's got a nice little, so just Google Harvard Business School Press, how to read a book quickly or something like that, and it gives you the outline for that.
Most of my business reading is Harvard Business Review or Wall Street Journal or Economic Development News. I'll read those instead of reading a novel. But I read very fast, and so I'll zoom through those, catch the stuff, send them off to somebody I know is interested, and then move on to the next thing. But I'm terrible about reading business books because I want to go back and get the conclusion. And I read the first couple of chapters to see if they're saying anything that's new that I hadn't read about before. And if there is, I zoom it back immediately and try and find out how they got there. So most of my books are dog-eared in the front and in the back, and I don't take very long to read them because I'm not interested in the how, I'm interested in the what.
But I also think that you get inspired and some of your ideation comes from those novels.
Oh, no
that
doubt.
are very authentic and just the storytelling of something,
piece,
it becomes the humanity piece.
Yeah, I love history novels, so things that are all, I'm learning about geography, about history, about politics. My favorite book is Atlas Shrugged, and I'll read that at least once a year. And it is a great book about the importance of the individual and ego. And I read a book called The Power Broker. It is my second favorite book, and that's the book about Robert Moses, who was a bureaucrat in the state of New York, who basically was responsible for their bridges, their parks, all of their highway system in New York. It kind of talks about how you have to work within the government to make things happen. I read Watership Down at least once every 2 years, which is a story about rabbits. But it's actually a whole bunch of political structure of these rabbit colonies and how they structure themselves. It's a weird collection of books, but those three, and then The Fountainhead, which is another Ayn Rand book, about architects and the importance of creativity and the ability to be yourself. So,
Great reading list.
Yeah.
Great
Awesome.
reading
Thank
list.
you.
One of the things you know about David, you hear about the humility of his story, this relationship. It seems to me this relationship between confidence, humility, and there's an intellect that's there. And that's wrapped in this spirit of we. All you hear from David is we. All you hear. And David's we is so deep that on the second day before the last day of his work, before his annual sabbatical, he says, yes, I'm gonna come and sit in a room with a group of young professionals and talk with you about leading change. And he's willing to say yes, and he always says yes, and that's the spirit of this great leader, and I thank you for that. I don't have a bottle of bourbon for you today, but would you please join me in thanking David for his
I will tell you, we moved into our new space. We had a bit of a party, and my birthday was mid-June, so it was right about a month after we moved in. And one thing I did when we moved out, I had to take like 15 years worth of tchotchkes and get rid of them. They didn't fit in my new
I
office.
can't wait to see you.
Yeah, so I got
That was gone.
like maybe 10% of it's there, right?
Oh,
And
no.
unfortunately, I forgot and actually took all the booze that I had in my office, took it home. And so I almost never drank in the office, just having it there was a nice insurance policy. And so for my birthday, I got 4 bottles of bourbon.